An Alabama woman remains behind bars accused of fatally stabbing her boyfriend. While the woman denies she killed her boyfriend, prosecutors revealed a young child was a witness to the murder. On August 22nd, police officers responded to an apartment complex in Mobile, Alabama. It was there they made the horrific discovery, the lifeless body of 33-year-old Taylor Rawlins. Authorities pieced together the clues that would lead to an arrest of someone close to Taylor, his 31-year-old girlfriend, Jennifer Heathcoe. According to police, Taylor was cut by a knife during what appeared to be a domestic violence altercation with Heathcoe. And it seemingly wasn't the first time there was a domestic violence incident between Heathcoe and Taylor Rawlins. After police arrested Heathcoe, a check into jail records revealed she actually had a warrant for her arrest out of a city nearby in Daphne, Alabama. Just months prior to her boyfriend's death, Heathcoe was arrested in December of last year on charges of domestic violence against Taylor while the two were at a bar together. Police in Daphne say the warrant was for a failure to appear in court on that charge. After Heathcoe was arrested for murder, she denied stabbing Taylor to death. But according to prosecutors, there was a witness to the stabbing. That witness happened to be Taylor's 9-year-old daughter, who called 911. I want to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law&Crime YouTube takeover. The stories we cover at Law&Crime are very tough, and it shows that the world is at times a very unpredictable and scary place. So if you're ever hurt, it can be confusing and scary, especially if you don't know where to turn. But Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, can help. This is a firm with a team of more than 1,000 attorneys you should want in your corner. And there's a reason they're America's largest injury law firm. They win a lot. In the past few months, they've secured multiple multi-million-dollar verdicts that were considerably higher than the highest insurance offer. And we're all on our phones so often that Morgan & Morgan actually makes the process very easy for you. From submitting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts, it can all be done from your phone in 8 clicks or less. You don't even have to leave your couch. So if you're ever injured, you can start by easily submitting a claim at forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover. According to WALA, the 9-year-old told the 911 operator, "My stepmom stabbed my daddy." The conversation continued and the little girl is heard saying, "Yeah, please come quick. My daddy is gonna die." The operator asked where the girl's stepmother was and if she had the knife, and the child replied, "I don't know, I'm in my room." The Mobile County District Attorney Keith Blackwood told reporters with the outlet Jennifer Heathcoe tried to get the 9-year-old to lie during the call and say it was someone else. He said you can hear in the call what appears to be the defendant's voice telling the child that's calling to say it wasn't her. And you know the fact that this happened in front of children is absolutely tragic. In a second call, Heathcoe herself called 911 and reportedly said, "Yes, there was just a dispute. And I got you, baby. I got you. No, you're not. Breathe for me." The dispatcher then asked Heathcoe, "Did someone stab him, ma'am?" And Heathcoe replied, "Yes, ma'am. They ran out immediately." According to Heathcoe's lawyer, Taylor was the aggressor that evening. Heathcoe's lawyer told local reporters that the two had a tumultuous and violent relationship, and there was a violent incident that led up to this, and she felt like she needed to defend herself. I'm joined now by attorney Krista Ramey. And Krista, I want to get your take on this case. With the information that we know right now, do you think that this case is a clear-cut self-defense case?
I don't think it's clear cut, but I think that there are some very good arguments for Ms. Heathcote to make. First, for a clear cut self defense case, you're looking at information we just don't have made available to us yet that's out there in the public sphere. We know that there was a stabbing. We've learned through her father that there was a volatile relationship. We know some facts, but we also know that that she tried to tell her stepdaughter, or her, I guess, her boyfriend's daughter, that don't let him know I did it, and kind of maybe tried to cover some things up. But I think where I can see this going is in the area of domestic violence and abuse cases, when you're looking at battered spouse syndrome, or domestic partner syndrome. I think that is the avenue that, if I were defending this case, this is where I would explore. And it was the father, when he spoke up about her being in this volatile relationship, and it was probably self-defense. That's where I'm kind of landing right now, on a defense for this claim. And that's not a self-defense, it's an imperfect self-defense claim.
And a stab wound to the chest appears so personal to me, but do you think any part of you thinks that this may have been premeditated at all?
And again, yeah, I think that we don't know enough right now, but yes, and you're right on the personal nature of a stabbing death. A stabbing death is, something that requires a lot of force. I mean, to get through the chest wall, for a woman to be able to do that to a man, that requires a lot of strength and determination. Now, on the flip side of that, I'm seeing a lot more determination if I'm afraid for my life. and there is a fight for a weapon, and or he's got a weapon and I've got a weapon. We just don't know all of the facts yet. So you could have that up close personal nature of a stabbing for a death, but yet still have it fall within the area of a self defense or an imperfect self defense claim like battered spouse syndrome.
And does self defense also go out the window if Heathcoe can be heard on the 911 call telling the dispatcher someone else stabbed her boyfriend and fled the scene?
No, it goes to her credibility as a witness, and you'll see that happen often. But in self defense claims, that doesn't mean that they're not going to try to cover it up. And I did hear the prosecutor in one of the clips that we were listening to say, that this shows consciousness of guilt, that she tried to cover up the crime. That doesn't mean that it wasn't self-defense, because a lot of times, particularly if you're a battered spouse and you've been the victim of domestic violence, you don't believe in yourself at all. So how are you going to believe that other people will believe what you say? So you're going to see that that is, common in these types of cases, where just because it's self-defense doesn't mean you don't cover it up. It means that you're afraid of what the consequences might be and that people might not believe you.
And what's your take about what we know now about Jennifer Heathcoe and Taylor Rawlins' relationship overall? The two were together for over a year. They seemingly blended their families together to the point Rawlins' children was calling Jennifer Heathcoe their stepmother. But then on the other side, they were reportedly tumultuous and had a prior domestic violence incident months before Taylor's death. What are your thoughts?
So I've said this often when I talk about domestic violence. And I think that particularly as women in this country, I call it the beauty and the beast syndrome. And I didn't coin that phrase. I read it somewhere in some psychological book when I was in college. But it's so true. We're taught, if you love the beast, he'll turn into a prince, right? You love the beast, he'll turn into a prince. You kiss the frog, he's going to turn into a prince. Women are taught to believe that our love can correct or fix things, and that's just not true. So staying in a tumultuous relationship does not necessarily mean that the relation that is false. That's a false narrative. Those things can be true. Women oftentimes stay in relationships that are very destructive for long periods of time. I think it's 1 in 3 women in the US are victims of domestic violence, and 1 in 4 men are. So it's very common. Now, flip side of this, he could be the one that's the victim of domestic violence here, and she could be its abuser. We saw that recently in some criminal trials that kind of made a lot of notoriety. I believe it was a Ritchie case recently that you saw this kind of same thing and it was a stabbing case as well. So we don't know who is a battered spouse yet or the battered domestic partner yet.
And Taylor Rawlins' children were in the home at the time of the stabbing, and his 9-year-old daughter called 911 first, actually. She's just 9 years old. But how important will her account be in determining kind of what happened?
I think her account will be hugely important. This child has no real motive to lie. You know, this was something that happened to her father. If her father was an abuser and abused her or others, she's not going to lie about it. She'll be honest about it. And I really believe kids have this uncanny ability when they're observing the world to tell you accurately what happened. On the flip side, if they think that they're going to get in trouble, they have a really good ability to lie. So I think that her testimony is going to be critical in terms of what happened that evening, what she heard and saw. I think that she was in another room, thankfully, but the damage that can be done to this child is profound. So when the prosecutors are dealing with her, they need to make sure that they're doing it in a very trauma informed way, that they're looking at her as a victim much different than they do other victims because of her such young age, and that they're allowing her to come to them on her terms, and they're not forcing her to give up information too quickly. And because that could create a situation where you might not get as accurate of information from her.
And it must have been just terrifying for his young children to hear that commotion and then later learn their father did pass away. What are your thoughts, especially as prosecutors allege Heathcoe asked one of his daughters to lie and say she didn't do the stabbing?
Yeah, I mean, this is no good situation for these children, and something that the youngest was 9. This is something that she will remember. This is something that the other children will remember for the rest of their lives. So to compound that by saying, "Don't let anyone know I did it," lie about what happened in the death involving your father, that could have a really profound impact and compound the danger and the damage that's been done to this child.
It's been reported that Heathcoe is being held on no bond due to her failure to appear in court for the domestic violence charge after she and Taylor Rawlins got into a fight over the car keys because Heathcoe reportedly thought Rawlins was too drunk to drive. Now, security cameras reportedly caught Heathcoe swinging at Rawlins, but according to her attorney, he made contact with her, causing her to fall to the ground. What does that say to you about maybe the toxicity within their relationship?
Yeah, I mean, you see this oftentimes too, where I mean, mutual combat between spouses that are abusing each other. I mean, it's not uncommon. I think that we got a little taste of that, several years ago during the Depp Heard trial, when the coverage of that, where there might have been a little bit of mutual combat happening between the parties, and that's not uncommon. But when you combine alcohol, it just fuels things, and this is how the dispute arose, whether or not he pushed her down first or not. We know how it ended up. If he did push her down first, however, this does lend itself back to our original question for the self defense claim or the imperfect self defense claim here. I think that if she was the first to strike, we're looking at maybe she was the abuser and not him, which does happen.
And are you surprised no bond was issued in the or excuse me, the stabbing case?
No, not at all, because this is, a murder charge, a homicide case. You do get the opportunity to get bond, but she demonstrated that she might be a flight risk by failing to appear, and she's also demonstrated her propensity for violence. So I think that it's perfectly acceptable for the judge to deny bond in this case. Now that might be revisited later, but right now with that failure to appear, I'm totally not surprised at all that the judge didn't grant bond.
And going back to the allegations of previous domestic violence between the two, how much do you think that will or will not be allowed to be used in trial?
If she raises the claim of domestic violence, abuse, and battered spouse or battered domestic partner syndrome, then it will be allowed in trial. Absolutely. I don't think without a question, because that will go to the expert testimony that will have to come in order to establish that claim. They've got to establish that she was in fact falls within this category of individuals. Now remember, this is not a DSM-5 diagnosable defense. Imperfect self-defense, or battered spouse syndrome is kind of a subcategory within post-traumatic stress disorder. So you're going to have to talk about what the trauma was that she experienced and how she, interpreted that trauma, and why in this particular instance, on this particular evening, she thought she was in fear for her own life. And so that past trauma has to come in order to make that proof.
And do you even see this case going to trial, or do you think that Jennifer Heathcote could strike a plea deal?
I think that if she can demonstrate some good evidence and has a good psychologist that they retain and present that evidence to the DA, and the DA has their own testing done, you could see a plea. Sure. I think that if it is genuine and a real claim, then you can see a plea.
All right, Krista, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Jennifer Heathcote pleaded not guilty. She remains behind bars in a Mobile Metro jail on no bond. She has a preliminary hearing scheduled for October 1st. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.